My name is Maya. I'm 61. And my own sister, who happens to be a bank manager, publicly humiliated me for trying to withdraw $150. Before I tell you how I responded by initiating a $4.2 billion asset transfer that froze their entire system and got her fired on the spot, do me a favor and let me know what city you're watching from in the comments below. It helps me know I'm not alone in this. You have to understand why I didn't scream or make a scene in that bank. You have to understand my family. For them, I was always the background one, the quiet sister who brought handmade gifts instead of expensive presents. I still remember my 11th birthday celebration. I'd spent weeks creating a scrapbook for my parents, carefully arranging photos and writing little stories about our family memories. My fingers were stained with glue and marker ink for days. I was so excited when I presented it to them, my heart pounding with anticipation. My father, William, glanced at it briefly before turning to my sisters. "Now, Victoria, Stephanie, what did you two get us?" They'd pooled their allowance to buy some expensive cologne. My mother, Patricia, clapped her hands in delight. My scrapbook was set aside on a side table, forgotten before the evening was over. That was the moment I learned my place in the family hierarchy. But it wasn't just that one moment. It was a pattern that repeated itself over and over, like a broken record that no one bothered to fix. When I was 13, I won second place in the county science fair for a project about renewable energy. I was so proud. I'd spent months researching, building models, testing theories. When I ran home to tell my family, Victoria was already there, showing off her new cheerleading uniform. My father barely looked up from his newspaper when I mentioned my award. "That's nice, Maya," he said absently. But when Victoria did a cartwheel in the living room, he put down his paper and applauded. When I was 16, I got my first job at the local bookstore. I was excited about earning my own money, about the independence it represented. But at dinner that night, all anyone could talk about was Stephanie's new boyfriend, the son of a prominent local businessman. My mother spent 20 minutes discussing what this meant for our family's social standing. My job announcement got a distracted, "Good for you, dear," before the conversation moved on. I wasn't the brilliant one, or the charming one, or the ambitious one. Victoria was the corporate climber, ruthlessly ascending the ladder with calculated precision. Even as a teenager, she had this way of making everything about her advancement, her networking, her future success. Stephanie was the social queen, manipulative and magnetic, always commanding attention. She could walk into a room and instantly become the center of it, drawing people to her like moths to a flame. I was just Maya, the placeholder, the family's quiet, convenient afterthought. This dynamic only intensified as we grew older. It hardened like cement around my ankles, making it impossible to move, impossible to be seen. Years later, when I was in my 30s at a family Christmas dinner, I tried to share some exciting news. I'd been volunteering at a local literacy program, and we just received a grant to expand our services to 3 new schools. I was thrilled. This program meant everything to me. It was where I felt useful, where I felt like I was making a difference. I opened my mouth to speak, but Victoria cut me off mid-sentence, laughing as she announced her latest promotion to regional director. The conversation immediately pivoted to her new title, her salary increase, her corner office with the view. My father beamed with pride, asking detailed questions about her responsibilities. My mother asked what kind of vacation she was planning with her bonus. I just sat there, my small victory dissolving into background noise. The words I'd been so excited to share seemed to shrivel up in my throat. It felt like I was invisible at my own family gathering. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was when my uncle asked, "And what about you, Maya? What have you been up to?" Before I could answer, Stephanie jumped in with a laugh. "Oh, you know Maya. Still playing with her little books and her volunteer work. Some people never grow up, right?" The table erupted in polite laughter. Even my parents smiled. And I realized that to them, my life's work, helping children learn to read, giving them the tools to build better futures, was just a cute hobby. Something to be indulged, like a child playing house. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother. She was a gentle soul like me, but her eyes missed nothing. She had this way of really listening when I talked, of asking follow-up questions that showed she cared about the details of my life. I remember one afternoon when I was about 25, sitting in her kitchen while she made her famous apple pie. I was telling her about a particularly difficult student I was working with, a little girl who'd been struggling with reading because of some learning differences. My grandmother stopped what she was doing and really listened as I explained the breakthrough we'd had that week. "You know what I see when I look at you, Maya," she said, her hands covered in flour. "I see someone with the rarest gift of all. You see people, really see them. That little girl will remember you for the rest of her life, not because you taught her to read, but because you made her feel seen." Before she passed when I was 35, she left me a small antique music box. Inside was an old brass key and a handwritten note in her elegant cursive. "For my youngest granddaughter, because she has the purest heart. Use this when they forget your worth." She also named me the executor of a modest family trust fund, something meant to be a safety net for all of us. It wasn't a massive amount, but it was her legacy. At the time, it seemed like just another responsibility, another quiet duty for the quiet daughter. Recently, I'd noticed some irregularities in the trust statements. Strange withdrawals made by Stephanie. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, always with vague explanations. Emergency expenses, temporary loans, family obligations. I'd made a mental note to investigate further. A small knot of anxiety was forming in my stomach, but I'd pushed it aside. You always want to believe the best of your family, right? Even when they've given you every reason not to. The one silver lining of being invisible to my family was that it forced me to build a life entirely on my own terms, away from their constant judgment. I had my cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood where nobody knew about my family's wealth or status. I had my books, shelves and shelves of them, from classic literature to modern poetry to technical manuals on subjects that fascinated me. And I had Mrs. Rodriguez. She lived next door, a 78-year-old retired nurse with a laugh that could brighten any room and eyes that sparkled when she told stories about her late husband, Carlos. She was more of a mother figure to me than my own had ever been. She'd call just to share a new recipe she'd tried, or to tell me a funny memory about her grandchildren. She'd knock on my door with extra soup when she made too much, or invite me over to watch old movies on Sunday afternoons. Mrs. Rodriguez truly saw me. She remembered the little things I told her. She asked about my volunteer work with genuine interest. She celebrated my small victories and comforted me during my quiet defeats. With her, I didn't have to compete for attention or prove my worth. I could just be Maya, and that was enough. That frigid Tuesday morning in February, Mrs. Rodriguez had called, her voice shaky and concerned. Her heater had broken down during the night, and she'd woken up to a house so cold she could see her breath. The repair technician wanted $150 in cash up front before he'd even look at the system. She was on a fixed pension and came up short. "I'm so sorry to bother you with this, mija," she said, using the Spanish endearment that always made my heart warm. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I didn't know who else to call." "Don't you worry about a thing," I told her, my voice filled with confidence I didn't quite feel. "I'll go to the bank and get it for you right now. You just stay warm under those blankets, okay?" Which brought me here, standing in the sterile lobby of Summit Bank, waiting in line like everyone else. The bank was busy that morning, a typical Tuesday rush of people handling their weekly banking. And standing behind the manager's desk, watching me with a smug expression that I recognized all too well, was my sister, Victoria. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd climbed the corporate ladder through a combination of ruthless ambition and strategic networking. Her suit was expensive, her hair was perfectly styled, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. When my turn came, I approached the teller, a young man who looked like he was maybe 22, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Before I could even speak, Victoria glided over, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor like a countdown timer. "Well, well, look what wandered in," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. What brings you here, Maya? I kept my voice steady, professional. I just need to withdraw $150. She let out a sharp, theatrical laugh. It was a performance, and the entire bank was her audience. I could feel other customers turning to look, their conversations pausing as they sensed drama unfolding. $150? Is that all? She leaned in, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that everyone could hear. We don't really serve beggars here. Are you sure you even have that much in your account? The air left my lungs. Heat crawled up my neck like a living thing. I could feel the stares of other customers, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The young teller looked deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Victoria and me like he wanted to help but didn't know how. For a moment, I saw that 11-year-old me again, holding her forgotten scrapbook. I saw the 13-year-old with her science fair ribbon that nobody cared about. I saw the 16-year-old whose first job was dismissed as unimportant. I saw the 30-something woman at the Christmas dinner, her voice silenced by laughter, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. It was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I was so tired of this treatment, so tired of being made to feel small, so tired of being invisible in my own family. I looked my sister directly in the eye. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out of the bank, the glass doors sliding shut behind me with a soft hiss. At that moment, I thought that was the worst of it. The humiliation, the shame, the familiar sting of being dismissed. I was so wrong. The worst wasn't what she had done. It was what I was about to do. That night, my apartment felt smaller than usual. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the gentle hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I made myself chamomile tea, my hands trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the residual humiliation of the morning. I sat on my second-hand sofa, the one I'd bought from a thrift store 5 years ago, and opened my laptop. It wasn't a fancy machine, just a reliable workhorse that looked unremarkable to anyone who might see it. But appearances can be deceiving. With a few keystrokes, I bypassed the simple user interface of my ordinary life and logged into my real one. The screen flickered and a clean, minimalist dashboard appeared. At the top, in stark white letters against a black background, was a name, Raven Capital 12, and beneath it, a number that would have made most people's hearts stop, $4,210, $350,000. This was my secret. This was the life I had built in the shadows while my family was busy sneering at my thrift store clothes and my quiet existence. Let me tell you how it started. After a particularly brutal argument years ago, I was 38 at the time, where my father told me I'd never amount to anything, that I was wasting my life with my little hobbies. I had walked away emotionally. Not just from that conversation, but from the entire dynamic that had defined my existence. I took the small inheritance my grandmother had left me personally, separate from the family trust, about $50,000 that she'd saved from her own modest pension over the years. Instead of spending it on something practical, something my family would approve of, I poured all my grief, all my intelligence, all my quiet determination into the one thing I understood better than anyone realized: patterns. You see, while my family was busy dismissing my volunteer work as a cute hobby, I was actually learning something profound. Teaching children to read isn't just about phonics and vocabulary. It's about recognizing patterns, the way letters combine to form sounds, the way sounds combine to form words, the way words combine to form meaning. But patterns exist everywhere, not just in language. They exist in numbers, in markets, in the seemingly random fluctuations of financial data. And I had always been good at seeing patterns. During those long, lonely nights after my family gatherings, when I'd come home feeling invisible and worthless, I started studying. Not just reading about financial markets, but really studying them. I learned about algorithmic trading, about machine learning, about the mathematical models that drive modern finance. I spent 2 years building something beautiful. I created a predictive algorithm, a piece of code so elegant and powerful it felt like poetry. I called it Sparrow after the birds that used to sing outside my window during those long, lonely nights of coding. They were small, unremarkable birds that most people ignored, but they had this incredible ability to navigate vast distances, to find their way home no matter how far they traveled. Sparrow wasn't a person. It was an entity, a ghost in the financial machine, and I was its creator. It could analyze market patterns, predict fluctuations, and execute trades with a precision that human traders couldn't match. The first year, I made $200,000, the second year $800,000. By the third year, I was making more money in a month than my father made in a year at his prestigious law firm. But I didn't tell anyone. I didn't buy expensive clothes or a fancy car. I didn't move to a penthouse apartment or start flashing wealth around. I just kept living my quiet life, volunteering at the literacy center, having tea with Mrs. Rodriguez, being the invisible daughter. Because I had learned something important. True power isn't about showing off. It's about having options. And for the first time in my life, I had options. Raven Capital 12 was the investment fund built on Sparrow's success, and it had grown into a silent titan. The name was deliberate. Ravens are intelligent birds, often underestimated, capable of solving complex problems. And the number 12? That was my grandmother's birthday, December 12th. A little tribute to the only person who had ever truly believed in me. No one knew I was behind it. To the financial world, M. Ren was just another mysterious investor, someone who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. To my family, I was just Maya, a 61-year-old woman living a simple life in Denver, still playing with her little hobbies. I let out a bitter laugh that echoed in the quiet room. The irony was suffocating. My own sister, who had just publicly shamed me for $150, was a mid-level manager at a bank, probably making around $80, €0 a year, a salary she constantly bragged about at family gatherings. And I could buy her bank 20 times over without even noticing the expense. But as I sat there staring at the screen, something else caught my attention. I wasn't seeking revenge. Not yet. I was just doing what I always did when I felt overwhelmed. I lost myself in work. I decided to run a quarterly review of my fund's new strategic partnerships. It was just routine due diligence, the kind of careful analysis that had made Sparrow so successful. My primary investments were managed by a massive top-tier global financial institution called Meridian Holdings. They were one of the biggest players in the market, with tentacles reaching into every corner of the financial world. I was scrolling through a list of their recent acquisitions, smaller companies they'd absorbed to expand their retail services. It was boring work, the kind of detailed analysis that most people would find mind-numbing. But I'd always found comfort in numbers, in the clean logic of financial statements. And then I saw it. A name that made my blood run cold. Summit Bank, my sister's bank. The bank where she wielded her petty power like a weapon. I clicked on the details, my heart starting to race. Through a chain of corporate acquisitions that had happened over the past 18 months, Summit Bank had been purchased by a regional holding company, which had then been absorbed by a larger financial group, which was now a subsidiary of Meridian Holdings, which meant that Victoria's employer was now effectively working for my fund. Victoria worked for me. She just didn't know it. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The universe had just handed me the most perfect irony I could have imagined. But it got better, or worse, depending on how you looked at it. I dug deeper into Summit Bank's performance metrics. What I found made my stomach turn. Victoria wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was incompetent. Customer satisfaction scores for her branch were in the bottom 10% of the entire network. Staff turnover was astronomical. They'd gone through 6 tellers in the past year alone. Complaint letters about her management style filled a thick folder in the corporate files. The woman who had just humiliated me for being poor was actually a liability to a company I essentially owned. I spent the next hour reading through incident reports, customer complaints, and internal memos. A pattern emerged that was all too familiar. Victoria was a bully. She treated customers with disdain, especially those she perceived as being beneath her social status. She berated employees for minor mistakes. She played favorites based on account balances and personal connections. There was one complaint that particularly caught my attention. An elderly man had come in to withdraw money for his wife's medical bills. When he'd had trouble filling out the forms due to his arthritis, Victoria had loudly announced to the entire bank that some people shouldn't be allowed to handle their own finances. The man had left in tears. Another report detailed how she'd refused to help a young mother open a savings account because the initial deposit was too small to be worth our time. The woman had been trying to start an emergency fund for her family, putting aside $20 from each paycheck. Victoria had turned her away, suggesting she come back when she had real money to invest. Reading these reports, I realized something profound. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. Not just for me, but for every person Victoria had ever made feel small, every customer she'd humiliated, every employee she'd driven away. A switch flipped in my mind. It wasn't about the $150 anymore. It wasn't about the decades of insults from my family. It was about the system they worshipped, the one built on money and status and titles, was the very system that now gave me all the power. And I realized this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a responsibility to use the power my grandmother knew I possessed. I spent the rest of the night not in anger, but in cold, calculated focus. This wouldn't be a messy, emotional outburst. It would be a surgical strike, precise and devastating. At 4 a.m., I picked up a secure phone and made a call to my top legal counsel, a woman named Sarah Chen, who specialized in corporate restructuring. She was used to getting calls from me at odd hours. The financial world never sleeps. "Good morning, Sarah," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I need you to arrange an emergency risk assessment meeting for tomorrow morning with the regional director of Summit Bank's parent company. The representative from Raven Capital 12 will be M. Wren. Yes, I'll be attending personally." There was a pause on the other end. In all our years of working together, I'd never attended a meeting in person. M. Wren was always represented by lawyers or conducted business through secure video calls. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked carefully. "This is quite a departure from your usual protocol." "I'm sure," I said. "And Sarah, I want you to prepare a complete asset transfer authorization. All of it. Every penny." Another pause. $4.2 billion Maya. That's not just a withdrawal. That's a statement. "Exactly," I said. "It's time to make a statement." I hung up. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I spent the next few hours diving deep into Summit Bank's corporate structure, their financial health, their management reviews. I pulled up employee satisfaction surveys, customer retention rates, profit margins by branch. What I found painted a clear picture. Victoria's branch was dragging down the entire regional performance. Her management style wasn't just cruel, it was expensive. The constant staff turnover meant continuous training costs. The customer complaints were driving business to competitors. Her branch had the lowest customer acquisition rate and the highest account closure rate in the entire network. The woman who had just humiliated me for being poor was actually costing her company hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue and increased expenses. As dawn broke through my apartment windows, I realized something profound. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. Not just for me, but for every person Victoria had ever made feel small. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, still sitting in her cold apartment, waiting for me to help her. I thought about that young teller yesterday, the way his face had crumpled with embarrassment when Victoria made her scene. I thought about the elderly man with arthritis, the young mother trying to save $20 at a time, all the people who didn't have the power to fight back. Well, I did have that power, and it was time to use it. The next morning, I didn't dress like a billionaire. I chose a simple, well-tailored charcoal gray dress, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth, no designer handbag, no expensive jewelry. My power wasn't in what I wore. It was in what I knew. As I stood in front of the mirror, I had a flicker of doubt. A voice that sounded suspiciously like my mother's whispered in my ear, "Is this necessary, Maya? Why cause such a fuss? Who is this person staring back at me?" This woman who was about to bring a world of trouble down on her own sister. For a second, I felt a wave of nausea. Was this making me like them? Cruel, vindictive? Was I becoming the very thing I'd always hated about my family? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I walked over to the antique music box and took out my grandmother's note. The paper was soft and worn at the creases from all the times I'd read it over the years. For my youngest granddaughter, because she has the purest heart. Use this when they forget your worth. My heart. She didn't say to use my anger or my wealth or my intelligence. She said to use my heart. And my heart knew that true strength wasn't about letting people walk all over you. It was about having boundaries. It was about demanding respect, not as a billionaire, but as a human being. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. But before I could move forward, I needed to confront the past. I needed to understand how we'd gotten here. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and let my mind wander back to the beginning. When had it started? When had I become invisible to my own family? I think it was when I was 7 years old. We were at my cousin's wedding, a big, elaborate affair at the country club. Victoria was 9, Stephanie was 8, and I was the baby of the family. During the reception, the photographer was taking pictures of all the children. He lined us up by height, which put me at the end. "Actually," my mother said, stepping forward, "let's just do the older girls. Maya, you go sit with Grandma." I remember walking away, confused and hurt, while Victoria and Stephanie posed for picture after picture. Later, when I asked why I couldn't be in the photos, my mother said, "Oh, honey, you were being fussy. We didn't want you to ruin the pictures." But I hadn't been fussy. I'd been standing there quietly, excited to be included. That was the first time I realized that my presence was seen as a potential problem, something to be managed rather than celebrated. The pattern continued throughout my childhood. When Victoria started taking piano lessons, I asked if I could learn too. "We can't afford lessons for everyone," my father said. But when Stephanie wanted to join the dance team a year later, somehow the money was found. When I brought home straight A's in middle school, my parents barely looked at my report card. But when Victoria made the honor roll in high school, there was a celebration dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town. I learned to stop asking for things. I learned to stop sharing my achievements. I learned to make myself smaller and smaller until I practically disappeared. But here's the thing about being invisible. It gives you a unique perspective. You see things that other people miss. You hear conversations that weren't meant for your ears. You understand family dynamics in a way that the visible children never do. I saw how my parents played favorites. I saw how Victoria learned to manipulate situations to her advantage. I saw how Stephanie discovered that charm could get her almost anything she wanted. And I saw how they all learned to use me as a convenient scapegoat when things went wrong. When Victoria got caught cheating on a test in high school, somehow it became my fault for not being a good influence. When Stephanie crashed the family car at 17, I was blamed for not reminding her to be careful. I was simultaneously invisible and responsible for everything that went wrong. The worst part wasn't the neglect or the blame. The worst part was the gaslighting. When I tried to talk to my parents about how I felt, they'd act like I was being dramatic. "You're too sensitive, Maya. You're imagining things. We treat all our daughters equally." But I wasn't imagining it. I had evidence. I kept a journal throughout my teenage years, documenting the differences in treatment. The number of times Victoria's achievements were celebrated versus mine. The amount of money spent on Stephanie's activities versus my requests for art supplies. The number of family photos I was excluded from versus the ones I was included in. I had data. I had proof. But when you're a child, data doesn't matter. What matters is love, and I was starving for it. By the time I reached adulthood, I'd internalized the message so completely that I didn't even try to compete anymore. I chose a quiet life, a simple job, modest goals. I told myself I was being realistic, that I was playing to my strengths, but really, I was just staying in the box they'd built for me. The only person who ever challenged that narrative was my grandmother. She saw through the family dynamics in a way that no one else did. I remember one Thanksgiving when I was in my 20s. I'd just started volunteering at the literacy center, and I was excited about the work I was doing. But every time I tried to talk about it, someone would change the subject or interrupt me with something about Victoria's latest promotion or Stephanie's new boyfriend. After dinner, I was helping my grandmother with the dishes when she suddenly stopped washing and looked at me. "You know what I see when I look at you, Maya," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I see someone who's been told she's ordinary for so long that she's started to believe it. But ordinary people don't change lives the way you do. Ordinary people don't see the potential in struggling children the way you do. Ordinary people don't have the patience and wisdom to help someone learn to read." She dried her hands and turned to face me fully. "Your sisters are successful, yes, but success and significance are two different things. Victoria climbs ladders, but you build bridges. Stephanie collects admirers, but you create hope. Don't ever let anyone convince you that what you do doesn't matter." That conversation changed something in me. Not immediately, but gradually. It planted a seed that would eventually grow into the confidence I needed to build Sparrow, to create Raven Capital, to become the person I was today. My grandmother saw my potential before I did. She saw that my quiet nature wasn't a weakness, it was a superpower. She saw that my ability to listen, to observe, to understand patterns could be channeled into something extraordinary. And now, 26 years after her death, I was finally ready to use the gift she'd recognized in me. My resolve hardened, not into anger, but into a calm, clear purpose. I put the note in my purse, a secret piece of armor, and walked out the door. But first, I made one stop. Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. I knocked gently on her door. When she opened it, wrapped in a thick robe and 2 blankets, her face lit up despite the obvious chill in her apartment. "Maya, dear, did you get the money? I was so worried about bothering you with this." I handed her an envelope. Inside wasn't just $150, it was $500. "The extra is for a new heater," I said softly. "A good one. You shouldn't have to worry about being cold." Her eyes filled with tears. "Maya, I can't accept this. This is too much." "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, taking her hands in mine. "You've given me more kindness in 2 years than my family gave me in 60. Please, let me do this." She hugged me tight, and for a moment, I felt what real family was supposed to feel like. Unconditional love, mutual respect, genuine care. "You have the biggest heart," she whispered. Those words echoed in my mind as I drove to Summit Bank. My grandmother's words, Mrs. Rodriguez's words, the same truth, spoken decades apart. I wasn't doing this out of cruelty. I was doing this out of love. Love for all the people who'd been hurt by Victoria's behavior. Love for the employees who deserved better leadership. Love for the customers who deserved basic human dignity. And yes, love for myself. The kind of self-love that says, I deserve better than this. When I walked into Summit Bank for the second time in 24 hours, the atmosphere was completely different. A nervous-looking man in an expensive suit was waiting by the entrance, checking his watch every few seconds. This was Mr. Thompson, the regional director. He'd flown in from Seattle that morning on a red-eye flight, summoned by an emergency call from corporate. He rushed forward as I entered, his hand outstretched and slightly trembling. "Ms. Wren, an absolute honor. I'm David Thompson. Thank you so much for coming." His eyes darted around nervously, taking in the busy bank lobby, the customers going about their normal business, completely unaware that a financial earthquake was about to hit. Victoria was standing near her glass-walled office, a confused look on her face. She saw me, and her expression immediately curdled into a sneer. She started to walk over, probably to throw me out again, but then she saw Mr. Thompson fawning over me, his face pale with anxiety. The sneer on her face froze, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to process why the regional director was treating the beggar from yesterday like visiting royalty. "Please this way, Ms. Wren," Mr. Thompson said, gesturing toward Victoria's office. "We can speak privately in here." As we walked toward the office, I caught a glimpse of the young teller from yesterday. He looked up and recognized me, his eyes widening in surprise. I gave him a small nod, and he nodded back, a tiny gesture of solidarity that meant more to me than he could know. We walked into the office, the very same room from which Victoria ruled her little kingdom. I sat down in the visitor's chair, the same chair where countless customers had been made to feel small. Mr. Thompson remained standing, wringing his hands like a man facing execution. Victoria hovered in the doorway, her arms crossed, trying to project authority she no longer had. The irony was delicious. Here I was, in Victoria's seat of power, while she stood in the doorway like a supplicant waiting for permission to enter. "So," I began, my voice quiet but carrying in the tense silence. "Raven Capital 12 has some concerns." Mr. Thompson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Of course, Ms. Wren. Anything. How can we help?" "It's not about how you can help," I said, looking from his terrified face to my sister's confused one. "It's about a decision we've already made." I paused, letting the tension build. In the silence, I could hear the normal sounds of the bank continuing outside. Customers talking, phones ringing, the soft beep of the ATM. Life going on, completely unaware that everything was about to change. Due to, let's call them serious concerns about the professional culture and management competency at this branch, Raven Capital 12 is initiating a complete asset transfer. Mr. Thompson looked like he was going to be sick. His face went from pale to green, and he gripped the back of a chair for support. Victoria just looked clueless, her brow furrowed in confusion. "A what?" she asked, her voice sharp with irritation. Even now, even in this moment, she couldn't hide her disdain for what she perceived as ignorance. I turned my full attention to her for the first time since entering the office. "It's a banking term, Victoria. Let me simplify it for you." The condescension in my voice was deliberate, a mirror of the tone she'd used with me yesterday. I watched as she registered it, her eyes narrowing. "It means my fund is publicly declaring that your bank's parent company is too incompetent and too risky to manage our money. We are pulling all of our assets, we're taking all $4.2 billion and we're moving it to a competitor. And per the terms of our agreement, we are required to state exactly why." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The reason will be loss of confidence in personnel, specifically personnel at this branch." The color drained from Mr. Thompson's face so quickly I thought he might faint. But it was Victoria I was watching. I could see the exact moment when the pieces started falling into place in her mind. The name M. Wren, the impossible sum of money. Me, her worthless sister, sitting in this chair, commanding the terrified attention of her boss's boss. It all crashed together in her mind at once. Her jaw went slack. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. "You," she whispered, her voice cracking like ice. "It's you." I gave her a small, sad smile. "Me? I just came in yesterday to withdraw $150, remember?" And that's when she broke. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The arrogant bank manager, the golden child, my tormentor for over 5 decades, crumpled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Her knees literally buckled, and she dropped to the floor in a heap. It wasn't elegant or dignified. It was a complete and total collapse of everything she thought she knew about the world, about power, about her place in the family hierarchy. "No, no, no," she sobbed, actual tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. The mascara ran in black streaks down her cheeks, and her carefully styled hair fell into her face as she shook her head in denial. She started to crawl toward me on her hands and knees, her expensive suit getting wrinkled and dirty on the office floor. "Maya, please, please don't do this. You can't. You'll ruin me. You'll ruin the family's reputation. What will Mom and Dad say?" Even now, even in her utter desperation, it was all about her. Her pleas weren't for forgiveness, for the decades of cruelty. They weren't acknowledgments of the pain she'd caused. They were about saving herself, about her image, about what our parents would think. "Please," she begged, reaching for my feet. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I was having a bad day. I didn't mean it. You know how stressed I get at work. Please, you have to understand." I looked down at her, this woman who had made my life miserable for as long as I could remember, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no pity. Just a profound emptiness where all those years of hurt used to live. Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, had gone from pale to red with fury. His hands were shaking as he pointed a trembling finger at the heap on the floor that was my sister. "You," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You did this. You brought this disaster on us." He turned to me, his face a mask of professional panic. "Ms. Wren, please. Surely we can work something out. This is clearly a personnel issue, not a systemic problem. We can address this immediately." "The asset transfer stands," I said quietly, cutting him off. Victoria's sobs grew louder. "Maya, please. Think about what this will do to the family. Think about Mom and Dad. They'll never forgive you for this." And there it was. The same manipulation tactic that had worked for decades. The appeal to family loyalty, the guilt trip, the suggestion that I was the one being unreasonable. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. "Get out," Mr. Thompson said to Victoria, his voice cold as winter. "Get out of my sight. You are fired. Security." As two guards came in and gently but firmly lifted a hysterical Victoria to her feet, I stood up. I looked at my sister, her face blotchy and ravaged by tears, and I said quietly, so only she could hear, "This was never about the money, Victoria. It was about respect, something you never learned how to give." She looked at me with such hatred in that moment that I actually took a step back. "You think you're so smart," she hissed as the security guards held her arms. "You think you've won something, but you're still the same pathetic loser you always were. Money doesn't change that." And there it was. Even in defeat, even in complete humiliation, she couldn't help herself. She had to get in one last cut, one final attempt to make me feel small. But her words bounced off me like rain off a window. Because I finally understood something that had taken me 61 years to learn. Her opinion of me had never been about me. It had always been about her own insecurities, her own need to feel superior, her own fear of not being enough. I watched as they escorted her out of the bank, her cries echoing through the lobby. Other customers stopped what they were doing to stare. The young teller from yesterday watched with wide eyes, and I saw something that looked like relief cross his face. Mr. Thompson turned back to me, his face ashen. "Ms. Wren, I cannot express how sorry I am about this incident. If there's anything at all, we can do to change your mind." "The asset transfer stands," I repeated. "My legal team will be in touch with the details." I walked out of the bank, the glass doors sliding shut behind me, leaving the wreckage of my sister's life in my wake. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. The first tremor of a coming earthquake had just hit, and I knew the main shock was still to come. As I drove away, my phone started to buzz, and it didn't stop. The family network was already activating, the gossip chain that had always been so efficient at spreading news, especially bad news. A text from Stephanie. "OMG Maya, I heard something crazy happened with Victoria. Are you okay? We should talk." The fake concern was almost laughable. Stephanie hadn't checked on me in months, but now that there was drama, suddenly she cared about my well-being. A missed call from Gregory, Stephanie's sycophantic husband, who had never said more than 10 words to me at any family gathering. Then another text, this time from my mother. "Maya, please call me. We are all very worried." Worried. They weren't worried when Victoria was grinding me into the dirt in front of a bank full of strangers. They were worried now that the power dynamic had shifted, now that their carefully constructed family hierarchy was crumbling. The sickeningly sweet tone, the sudden concern, it was so transparent it was almost laughable. I let the phone buzz, ignoring them all. I needed a moment to breathe, to process what had just happened, but they were relentless. Call after call, text after text, each one more urgent than the last. Finally, as I pulled into my driveway, the phone rang again. The screen read, "Mom." I don't know why, but I answered it. Maybe some small part of me hoped for a different reaction. Maybe I thought that finally, someone in my family would ask if I was okay. "Maya." Oh, thank God. Her voice was a torrent of panicked words, rushing together like water through a broken dam. "What have you done? Victoria is a mess. Her career is over. How could you be so cruel, so vindictive? After all we've done for you, you do this to your own sister. You have to fix this. Think of the family. Think of the family. Not Maya, are you okay? Not, I can't believe she treated you like that. Not, I'm so sorry we let this happen. Just think of the family's reputation." "Mom," I said quietly, "did you even ask Victoria what she did to me?" "What she did? Maya, she's your sister. Whatever happened, it couldn't have been worth destroying her life over. She called me a beggar in front of a bank full of people. She humiliated me for trying to withdraw $150 to help Mrs. Rodriguez fix her heater." There was a pause, a long pause, and then, "Well, you know how Victoria gets when she's stressed at work. You shouldn't have taken it so personally." The last bit of hope in me withered and died. The last thread of obligation snapped. My voice, when I spoke, was colder than I'd ever heard it. "You're right," I said. "We need to talk about the family. All of us. One last time." Yes, she said, relief flooding her voice. "We'll come over. We'll sort this out. We'll figure out how to fix this mess." "Sunday," I said, cutting her off. "Dinner at my place. I'll text you the address." I hung up before she could reply. This couldn't be 1,000 small cuts spread out over years. It had to be one clean break, a final reckoning that would end this toxic dynamic once and for all. I spent the rest of the week in a strange state of calm. I went about my normal routine, volunteering at the literacy center, having tea with Mrs. Rodriguez, reading in my garden. But underneath the surface, I was preparing. I gathered documents. I made phone calls. I arranged for certain truths to finally come to light. Because Victoria's humiliation at the bank was just the beginning. There were other secrets in my family, other lies that needed to be exposed, and I was the only one who had the power and the evidence to bring them all crashing down. Sunday evening couldn't come fast enough. Sunday evening, they arrived like a delegation coming to negotiate a peace treaty. My father, my mother, Stephanie, and Gregory. They pulled up to the address I'd sent, and I watched from the window as they stared, dumbfounded. It wasn't my small, anonymous apartment building. It was a house, a beautiful modern home nestled in a quiet wooded neighborhood, tasteful, elegant, and clearly very, very expensive. The kind of house that spoke of serious money, old money, the kind of wealth that didn't need to show off. Their faces were a mixture of shock and naked greed. I could practically see the dollar signs in their eyes as they took in the manicured landscaping, the 3-car garage, the subtle but unmistakable signs of affluence. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Welcome," I said, my voice neutral and calm. They walked in like tourists in a museum, gaping at the high ceilings and the art on the walls. The family dinner I'd prepared wasn't fancy, just a simple roast chicken with vegetables, but it was laid out on a long dining table that could seat 12. They sat down, an awkward silence hanging in the air like smoke. I could feel them trying to process this new reality, trying to reconcile the Maya they thought they knew with the Maya who owned a house worth more than most people made in a lifetime. My father was the first to speak, his voice gruff and demanding. "All right, Maya, what is all this? You've made your point. You're rich. Congratulations. Now you need to fix the mess you made with your sister." Even now, even sitting in my house, eating my food, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge that Victoria had done anything wrong. It was all about the mess I made. Stephanie chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "He's right, Maya. We're family. Victoria made a mistake, but destroying her life over it, it's just not right. We have to support each other. Support each other." Where was that support when I was growing up invisible? Where was that support when Victoria was humiliating me in public? They spent the next 10 minutes lecturing me. They blamed me for being cruel, for being secretive, for embarrassing them. My mother just sat there, wringing her hands, nodding along like a bobblehead doll. Not once did they acknowledge what Victoria had done. Not once did they ask how I felt. Not once did they show even a shred of curiosity about how I'd managed to accumulate this kind of wealth. I let them finish. I let all the poison fill the room. Let them reveal exactly who they were when they thought they had the moral high ground. Then, when they were done, I calmly stood up and walked to a side table. I picked up a thin leather-bound file and placed it in the center of the dining table. "If everyone is finished talking about how I've ruined a life," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "perhaps we can talk about how Stephanie has been ruining a legacy." Stephanie's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I opened the file with deliberate slowness. "I'm talking about the family trust, the one grandmother set up for all of us, the one she trusted me to look after." I slid a bank statement across the table to my father. "You see that withdrawal? And this one? And this one?" I then slid over another document. "And here are the forged invoices Stephanie submitted from a shell company she created to justify those withdrawals." The silence was absolute. Gregory looked at his wife with horror, his face going white as he realized what this meant for his own reputation. My father's face was ashen as he looked at the proof, his hands shaking slightly as he held the papers. My mother looked at Stephanie, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. "For 3 years," I continued, my voice steady and calm, "she's been stealing from us. From you. From me. From the memory of the one woman in this family who valued integrity above everything else." Stephanie found her voice. "That's not—" "I can explain. Those were legitimate expenses. $47,000 for family emergency medical expenses." I read from any of the invoices. "Except there were no medical emergencies. At $23,000 for educational support for family members. Except none of us were in school. $31,000 for property maintenance on family assets. Except the trust doesn't own any property." I slid another document across the table. "And here's the paper trail showing that all of that money went directly into accounts controlled by Stephanie and Gregory." Gregory stood up so fast his chair fell over. "I didn't know," he said, his voice high and panicked. "Stephanie, you told me that money was from your inheritance." "Shut up, Gregory," Stephanie snapped, but it was too late. The admission was out there. They were finally forced to see that their other golden child wasn't just selfish. She was a common thief who had been stealing from her own family for years. My father looked at the documents, then at Stephanie, then back at the documents. "How much?" he asked quietly. $127,000, I said. "Plus interest and penalties, it comes to about $50,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. "But that's not even the worst part," I continued. "The worst part is what she spent it on." I slid over a final set of documents. Gambling debts. Stephanie has been feeding a casino addiction for years, and when her own money ran out, she started stealing from the family trust to cover her losses. The explosion was immediate. My father started shouting at Stephanie, demanding explanations. My mother started crying, wailing about the shame this would bring to the family. Gregory started backing toward the door, clearly calculating how quickly he could distance himself from his wife's crimes. But I wasn't done. "You want to talk about family?" I asked, my voice cutting through the chaos. "A family doesn't do this to each other. A family doesn't measure love in dollars and promotions. A family shows up." I stood up, looking at each of them in turn. "You were never a family to me. You were just shareholders in my misery. For 61 years, I've been the invisible daughter, the convenient scapegoat, the one you could ignore until you needed someone to blame." I took a deep breath, feeling decades of pain and anger finally finding their voice. "Victoria humiliated me in public, and your first instinct was to protect her reputation. Stephanie stole from our grandmother's legacy, and you're worried about the family shame. But when I was hurting, when I was struggling, when I needed support, where were you? The room fell silent except for my mother's quiet sobbing. "This isn't a family anymore," I said, my voice breaking with the pain of a lifetime. "It's a failed business, and I'm liquidating my shares." I looked each of them in the eye one final time. "This is goodbye." My father stood up, his face red with anger. "You can't just walk away from family, Maya. Blood is blood." "Blood is blood," I agreed. "But love is a choice. And you chose not to love me a long time ago." Stephanie was still trying to salvage the situation. "Maya, please, we can work this out. I'll pay back the money. We can go to family therapy. We can fix this." I almost laughed. "Fix this? Stephanie, you've been stealing from our grandmother's memory for 3 years. Victoria has been treating people like garbage for decades, and all of you have been treating me like I don't exist for my entire life. This isn't something that can be fixed with therapy." "So what?" my mother asked through her tears. "You're just going to cut us off? Pretend we don't exist?" "I'm going to do exactly what you've been doing to me for 61 years, I said quietly. "I'm going to act like you don't exist." Gregory, who had been silent through most of this, finally spoke up. "What about the trust? What happens to the money?" Of course, even now it was about the money. "The remaining funds will be donated to literacy programs and organizations that help elderly people with heating assistance," I said. "Grandmother would have approved." I walked to the front door and opened it. "I think it's time for you to leave." They filed out one by one, each of them trying to get in one last word, one final attempt to make me feel guilty or change my mind. But their words bounced off me like rain off glass. As I watched their car disappear down the street, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete and total peace. A few months have passed. The noise has faded. Stephanie's company fired her after an internal audit revealed her gambling problem, and she's facing legal trouble for the trust fund theft. Victoria is working some low-level administrative job across town, her banking career effectively over. I hear about it sometimes through the small-town gossip network, but it feels like a story about someone else's life. Gregory filed for divorce and moved to another state. My parents tried reaching out a few times, but their messages were always about fixing the family or working things out, never about acknowledging what they'd done wrong or asking how I was doing. I changed my phone number and didn't give them the new one. I'm standing in a patch of bright sunlight now. The air smells like fresh dirt and jasmine. I'm not in a boardroom or a fancy house. I'm at the new community garden wing of the local library, a project I funded anonymously. It's named the Rodriguez and Grandmother Memorial Reading Garden. Mrs. Rodriguez is here, sitting on a bench reading to a group of children. Her new heater is working perfectly, and she's wearing a warm sweater I bought her for Christmas. She catches my eye and gives me that warm, crinkling smile that has become my definition of family. The children around her are from the literacy program I've been supporting for years. Some of them are the same kids I worked with when I was just a volunteer, before I had the resources to do more. Now I can fund entire programs, hire additional teachers, provide books and supplies to families who can't afford them. I bend down and pick up a small seedling, a tomato plant that will grow throughout the summer and provide fresh vegetables for the community. As I place it in the soft earth, I finally understand something profound. The most important transaction of my life wasn't the $4.2 billion asset transfer that destroyed Victoria's career. It was the withdrawal of my love, my loyalty, and my energy from a toxic account that had been bankrupt for years. That account is now permanently closed. As my fingers press the soil around the new plant, I feel a sense of peace I've never known. I'm not the invisible daughter or the worthless sister anymore. I'm just Maya. And for the first time in my life, that feels like more than enough. I'm finally planting a garden of my own. One of the children, a little girl named Sophia, who reminds me of myself at that age, comes over to help me with the planting. She's been struggling with reading, but she's made incredible progress over the past few months. "Miss Maya," she says, her small hands carefully patting soil around another seedling. "My mom says you're the reason I have so many books at home now." I smile at her. "Reading is important, Sophia. It opens up whole new worlds. Will you read with me later? She asks. I'd love to, I say, and I mean it. This is my family now. Mrs. Rodriguez with her warm hugs and endless stories. Sophia and the other children who light up when they master a new word. The teachers and volunteers who work tirelessly to make a difference in their community. These are the people who see me, who value me, who love me for who I am rather than what I can do for them. My phone buzzes with a text from Sarah, my lawyer. The asset transfer is complete, and Raven Capital 12 has successfully moved all funds to a new financial institution. The old bank is struggling to recover from the loss, and there are rumors of more management changes coming. I delete the message without responding. That chapter of my life is closed. As the sun begins to set, casting golden light across the garden, I realize that revenge was never really the point. Justice was the point. Setting boundaries was the point. Choosing love over obligation was the point. I spent 61 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Now I'm surrounded by people who give it freely, without conditions, without expectations. Mrs. Rodriguez calls out from her bench. Maya, mija, come sit with us. Sophia wants to read you the story she wrote. I brush the dirt off my hands and walk over to join them. As I settle onto the bench, Sophia climbs into my lap with her handwritten story, and Mrs. Rodriguez pats my shoulder with the kind of maternal affection I'd always craved. This is what family feels like. This is what love looks like. This is what I was searching for all along. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt it was important. My question for you is this. Have you ever had to make the difficult, painful decision to walk away from a person or a situation in order to save yourself? Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But that doesn't mean we have to accept that treatment forever. Let me know in the comments if this story resonated with you. I'll be reading them, and I want you to know that your voice matters, your experiences matter, and you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. And if my story gave you strength to set boundaries in your own life, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more. It really does help me continue sharing these stories with all of you. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.